Fulbright was very much affected by the dismantling of USAID. They've lost a significant amount of grant support. I was just in Vietnam last month, and I can tell you that although times are tough right now at Fulbright, Fulbright is determined under the leadership of President Scott Fritzen to soldier on. And I can also honestly say that Fulbright University is thriving. The students and faculty at Fulbright are engaged in so much exciting teaching and learning and research, especially in these fields of Vietnamese history and Vietnam studies. I know this because I've had the great privilege over the last few years of spending a fair amount of time at Fulbright. Me and my colleagues at Dartmouth have collaborated with colleagues at Fulbright to build a new joint study abroad program. This program, which we launched in 2022, is called Developing Vietnam, and it's organized around Fulbright and Dartmouth students co-learning together, using both remote and in-person collaboration. We run this program each fall term, and it culminates in December when I take the participating Dartmouth students to Saigon, to Fulbright University, so the students can work together in person. So I've had a front row seat to all of the great work that Fulbright faculty and students have been doing, and today you will all be able to share that front row seat because we have a great group here of students, mostly from Fulbright University. We also have one Dartmouth student who's joining them to present some of the really exciting work that they're doing in various topics having to do with Vietnamese history and Vietnam studies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce, we have 3 presentations. I'm going to introduce each of the presenters in turn. Our first presentation is by Nguyen Kim Hoa. Hoa is from Binh Duong province in southern Vietnam. She is currently a senior at Fulbright. She is majoring in history and minoring in social studies. She will be presenting on the internal refugee crisis in nation building in Quang province from 1965 to 1975, what she calls a mobile history of the Vietnam War. Our second presentation will be made by Ma Van. Van is actually an alumnus of Fulbright. She graduated last year in the class of 2024. She is from Duong province in the Mekong Delta, and her major at Fulbright was Vietnam Studies. The third and final presentation today, or I should mention here that Van's presentation is entitled Understanding Vietnam's Prolonged Approach to Normalizing Relations with the United States, 1975 to 1995. Our third and final presentation is actually a group project. We have a total of 3 students, 2 from Fulbright and 1 from Dartmouth, who will be presenting to us. The first of these is Nguyen from Thao, who is currently a junior at Fulbright. She's from Lao Cai in northern Vietnam. Her major is also Vietnam Studies. The second member of that team is Thao Long. Long is from Saigon. He is also a junior, a member of the class of 26. He is majoring in history and Vietnam studies. And then last but not least, the third presentation will be made by Tiana Duong, who is from my university, Dartmouth College. Tiana is from Tampa, Florida. She's a member of the Dartmouth class of 2027. She's majoring in psychology with a minor in Asian studies. And I should mention that all of the students except for Van have participated in this joint Fulbright Dartmouth program that we've set up. And so this is one of the reasons that I'm so excited for this panel today. So let me just leave it there, and we will turn things over first of all to Ms. Quang.
Everyone, my name is Han. Can you hear me well? Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm a senior student at Fulbright University, Vietnam, and today I'm gonna present my paper titled Internal Refugee Crisis and Nation Building in Quang from 1965 to 1975. So the history I'm going to talk about is a very specific history of Guangxi province. The General Agreement in 1954 divided the province into two parts under two rival governments. Due to its symbolic importance and frontier position, Guangxi became one of the most fiercest battlefields in the war, and its people experienced mass displacement. Personal memoirs, scholarship, and journalism have significantly written about military battles happened in Guangxi. My paper, however, will talk about the life experience of civilians there who were repeatedly displaced during the war. So I have three main arguments to make for my paper. First of all, relocation was both an unintended consequence of violence as well as a deliberate strategy of on-sites to control the population. Second, the growing refugee crisis raised questions about the South Vietnam government's ability to protect its citizens, pushing the government to step up and control its military activities that generated refugees and support the existing ones. And third, however, these efforts were complicated by tension between the state, local officials, and the refugee themselves, leading to an even outcome in securing the refugee trust in the government. In this presentation, I will focus more on my third argument. Before diving into deeper, I would like to explain where the refugees in South Vietnam came from. So, long before the UN troops arrived in Vietnam, the Nguyen government already used population resettlement as a nation-building strategy, moving people to create an anti-communist national identity, to strengthen internal security, etc. Additionally, the NLF activities like political indoctrination, forced conscription, and taxation also make people to flee. But after 1965, the war escalation brought displacement to an unprecedented scale by bombing and shelling. And by 1968, the South Vietnamese government reported 2 million refugees, about 10% of its population, and does not even include those living outside the refugee camps. So the surge of displacement brought growing concern. In 1968, Senator Edward Kennedy visited South Vietnam to assess refugee and civilian casualty situation. After his trip, he delivered this speech. In essence, I found that the kind of war we are fighting in Vietnam will not gain our long-range objectives, that the pattern of destruction we are creating can only make a workable political future more difficult, and that the government we are supporting has given us no indication and promised little that it can win the lasting confidence of its people. So Kennedy criticized South Vietnam for failing to win the trust of its people, which called into question whether the U.S. should keep supporting such a government. Under both domestic and international pressure, the RVN tried to control military action that caused displacement and provide better support for the refugees. However, those government support for the refugees barely materialized in Guangxi before 1972 because local officials usually embezzle refugee relief for personal use. The refugees, therefore, often ended up in overcrowded camps lacking of healthcare and sanitation facilities and other basic necessities. It wasn't until 1972, when Guangxi became the epicenter of the war, that refugee aid finally began to trickle down to local level. In 1972, Hanoi launched the Eastern Offensive to enhance its negotiation position in the ongoing peace talk, and the People's Army of Vietnam quickly captured Guangxi within a month. The South Vietnam Army mounted a counter-offensive to retake the citadel, and its battles forced Guangxi civilians into a harrowing decision to flee or to stay, to flee northward or southward. Now, let's look briefly at why some people fled north and what they experienced. So I would like to introduce you to one of my interlocutors, called Chen Hai. His family had a deep tie with the NLF. His father was an NLF soldier. His mother has supplied them, and his father was sent to the north to study in a relocation campaign organized by the DRB to train children to become future cadre. His half-time explained why he went north. Running to the south was running to the enemy side. We were usually tussle. My mother worked for the revolution, so I had to run to the north. In addition, we didn't run to the south because we didn't know the way. There were no means of transportation, no government support, and everyone ran for themselves. The RBN government didn't announce anything, and they even ran first. They only care for themselves and abandoned the citizens. In contrast, he said, the revolution had people evacuate in orderly lines to avoid bombs and bullets. So for Thang, going north was not only political, but it was a practical choice. When South Vietnam government abandoned the refugees that they were supposed to protect, the North Vietnam government offered support to them. However, life in the north was very harsh because the DRB didn't have the resources to support the refugees once they got there. And some refugees, especially the children, sought to return to the south after being mistreated by the host family in the north. In contrast, although the South Vietnam government didn't support civilian retreat, they quickly provided refugees with abundant relief. Now, I would like to introduce two more interlocutors. The first is a peasant called Quang. So when the fighting occurred, he and his town have fled to Da Nang. And although his family also wanted to flee with him because they were fear of the communists, they couldn't because they were afraid of starving. However, it turned out that the South Vietnam government provided the refugees with ample food. As has said, not having family by my side is sad, but life there was all about eating and chilling. The government provided rice for everyone. Those who were still in school age could continue their studies. And my second interlocutor is Sun Lim. So he's an RBN clerk, and he took refuge in a relative's house in Da Nang. He remembered those days in Da Nang, his good old days. We lacked for nothing while being fed by the Americans in Da Nang. At that time, I was lazy. I went out a lot, here and there, freely. There were many places to explore in Da Nang, and I was young back then. So, by showcasing this, I seek to challenge the narrative of suffering in South Vietnam refugee camps, and the North is a place of communal support. Although both Sun Lim and Han Ha recognized the government relief efforts, only Han Ha trusted the government capability. Meanwhile, Sun Lim interpreted the abundant relief as South Vietnam dependency on American support and lack of discipline. The revolution would win eventually, and the Southern regime would fall because the latter had extravagant lifestyle with American backup. Meanwhile, the revolution was unshakable despite days and nights of struggles and suffering. So Sun Lim's unexpected response underscored how material conditions and perception of governance shape refugee political views beyond just who gave them rise. So beyond relief, Saigon also launched rehabilitation programs, resettling refugees or sending them back to their village, with the aim to help refugees to rebuild lives and renew their confidence in the government. Actually, this program existed before 1972, but the necessity to settle a huge amount of refugees from the eastern offensive made the central government set tight deadline for the officer, making the local officer rush to relocate refugees, often to areas unfit for farming and lacking of basic infrastructure. In some cases, officers discourage refugees from settling in other provinces as they fear of being displaced by new officers and losing their jobs. However, the refugees were not passive victims of the plan of the central and local officer government. Some outright refused to relocate unless the government could meet their needs. Others actively relocate themselves when the conditions were too harsh. This form of resistance actually forced the government to adjust their approaches. On and on, what happened in Quang revealed a mismatch between policy and implementation. Economically, this program failed to have the refugee achieve a stable life and ease the government financial burden. Instead, the government had to continue supporting the refugees after it made extensive investment to build resettlement infrastructure. Politically, the result was mixed. Some refugees lost faith and after enduring repeated displacement and poor support from the government, while others acknowledge the government's effort. Unfortunately, whatever fractured process was made didn't last. The Spring Offensive in 1975 dealt a final blow to the refugee trust in the government. In 1975, Hanoi launched the Spring Offensive. President Thieu ordered the One Corps commander Ngo Quang to redeploy his force to defend Da Nang, and the fighting and unprepared retreat caused a refugee exodus from Quang and Thi Huế to Da Nang. One of my interlocutors, Leda, who was displaced multiple times during the war, was skeptical of the government's capability to protect and care for the refugees. So Leda served as an RBN local military since 1971. He took refuge in Da Nang in 1972 and returned to Quang in 1974 in the government-sponsored program. When the Spring Offensive reached Quang, he fled to Da Nang again and stopped running when he reached Huế. That explains his decision is below. I didn't run anymore because being away from home for 2 years made me want to return. Wandering for survival was uncertain. Luckily, they gave me food. If they didn't, how would I survive? Since the US already cut aid, how could the government support Quang refugees, let alone those from 13 fleeing to Da Nang? That's why we all decided to go back. While some, like that, were disillusioned with the government, others, like Han Han, still believed in South Vietnam revival. These diverse perspectives reflected the uneven impact of Saigon's refugee policy during its past decade. While some refugees benefited from the government programs, others faced unfulfilled promises. For many people, the RBN collapsed in 30 April 1975, but for the Quang refugees, it collapsed in March 1975. To conclude, my research makes 3 contributions to the existing literature. First, it highlights how hostile youth relocation is a wartime strategy, not just to help civilians, but to control them. And second, complicates the narrative about refugee suffering, showing that while many suffer, others receive a real support from the South Vietnam government. And finally, it reframes refugees not as passive victims of political access, but as active agents who shape policy through resistance, mobility, and survival strategies. That's all. Thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yeah. So I'm Vâng, and I'm a senior student at Fulbright University, Vietnam. So I'm here today to present my research paper. Is about understanding Vietnam's rural approach to normalizing relations with the United States from 1975 to 1995. So a little bit about my introductions. So as we know that about the Vietnam War, a conflict that lasted 50 years, took place against a backdrop of divisions in the landscape of socialist societies and capitalist states worldwide. So in graduate school, research indicate that Vietnam's delayed normalizations of relations with the United States after 1975 was because of the perceived conservatives and purported failure to cite the opportunity to join the ASEAN and collaborate with the United States to open a global economic development, to establish its position in the Southeast ASEAN region, especially after the Vietnam War. We have the Vietnam have more power to not depend on the China or to avoid the Cambodia border war. This research will collect and analyze various primary and secondary resources, including memories and newspaper or research paper, to examine the diplomatic relations between Vietnam, the United States, and other countries such as China and Soviet Union, This article argued that the delayed normalizations with the United States is not result of the misgivings, but a calculated and prudent decision that aims to reconstruct the legitimacy of anti-American imperialism after unifications. So balancing power theory concept can be used to analyze the diplomacy strategic decisions. So moreover, this denounced diplomatic decisions set light on Vietnam's deliberate and thoughtful effort to position itself to globally after the 1975. So as I said that I will apply the theory of ghosting about the patterns of power concepts to analyze the case. About the theoretical framework, Golden State, he focused on actual or potential conflicts between state actor and the use of force, examining how international stability is attained or maintained, how it breaks down, and the utility of force is the means to resolve the conflict. Thus, the power is the key concept. So the principal aims of state is to gain the power, and military, security, or strategic issues are high politic, whereas economic and social issues are viewed as less important or low politics. So foreign high or politics dominate and set the environment for low politics. So the concept of balancing power emphasizes the two ways of balancing. The first one, internal balancing, is a strategic approach in a weak country focused on strengthening its economic or institutions or military capability to establish a resilient and autonomous positions on the global stage. And external balancing, conversely, so it involves a state effort to strengthen and expand the alliance and cooperations among states to counter to the higher power of the other states. How about the case of Vietnam? When I applied the concept of balance of power to analyze how the Vietnam Communist Party delayed the normalization with the United States. About the Vietnam military interventions in Cambodia and also in the Chinese invasion. In the Chinese invasion in 1979, the country found itself isolated and vulnerable. To mitigate the consequence of shifting the Soviet policy, long before the collapse of the USSR became certain, Vietnam recognized the need to adapt its security and diplomatic strategies. As part of this strategic adjustment, Vietnam began taking cautious steps to improve relations with China, ASEAN member, and the United States. For about the external balancing, Vietnam diversified international relations to reduce the dependency. For example, normalize the ties with China or expanded the relations with the United States or joined ASEAN and signed multiple FTAs. For the international balancing, the Vietnam after 1975, the government strengthened in internal economic resilience and build the domestic capabilities to ensure the autonomy. I also draw a map that the reason why I put the state as the actor, like human agency to conduct the research. You know that I will see the DRV policy during the war. The actor of U.S. policy, also the Sino-Soviet policy, and the Vietnam domestic situations will affect to the strategy of how the DRV will give the strategy to normalizations with the United States. And I will go through the background history context of the Vietnam. As you know that after 1975, the Vietnam reunion between the North and the South side. And also 1979, Vietnam faced the Cambodian brought the war and conflict with China. After that, Vietnam also faced the Sino-Soviet split. And until the 1986 is the Dartmouth revocations to Vietnam. So I come to the 1995. So Vietnam became the 7th member of ASEAN. And we got the questions. I got the questions that why Vietnam joined ASEAN. But until the 1995, and Vietnam's membership in ASEAN will considerably to strengthen its diplomatic positions, enable Vietnam to stable cooperation with its ASEAN partner, especially the bigger countries, and participate more in interregional or international cooperation framework or Pacific economic cooperations. Break out of these isolations and encourage commercial economic benefits and foreign investment, and moreover, enable Vietnam to cope better diplomatically with China. I have brought a book of the Quang girl. He is the former member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Vietnam, the first deputy minister of Foreign Affairs. So his book rethink the delay and missed opportunity to strengthen ties with the U.S. and the consequence after the border war between Sino and Vietnam since 1979. Therefore, I also researched many research papers of the other authors in this topic, and I realized that there are many research articles on the relation between the Vietnam and also the U.S. after 1975. However, most of this research only focused on the issues of overcoming post-war consequences and discussed by the two countries in just as a set of the failure of the two countries. Or several other research articles also discussed the negotiations process between Vietnam and U.S. However, most have not focused on the perspective of Vietnamese Communist Party when deciding to slow down the process of joining ASEAN. Also, I have read a research paper of Professor Edward Miller and also Duong in the research paper of the Vietnam War is the Vietnamese War, Agency and Society in the study of the Second Indochina War. And he gave a point very interesting that most of these studies about Vietnam around during the 1970 to the 1980, one of these studies drew heavily on American sources and focused on the U.S. actions, movies, or foreign policy decisions, while Vietnamese actors were often regulated to the second roles. So for that reason, I dedicated one to both the Vietnamese Communist Parties as the primary roles to conduct research the why the Vietnam Communist Party take their role to delay the normalization with the United States by strengthening their national building and also the economic and military to gain the power with the other countries. So first on about the internal patterns and political and economic reconstructions in Vietnam. The Vietnam economic policy after the 1975 political reconstructions. The political concept, the political landscape was shaped by the commitment to socialism rooted in Marxism and Leninism policies, and it's Duong who led the party from 1960 to 1986 drastic. This ideology is summarized in one sentence. These nations and socialism are one. So this sentiment emphasizes the connection between the Vietnamese identity and the socialist path. And moreover, as we know that the National Assembly and the party seeks compress from the strategic missions of the Vietnamese revolutions, clearly defining the goal of completing national unifications and bringing the country quickly, strongly and firmly toward the socialism. And the North has the task of promoting the construction of socialism and perfecting socialist relations, and the South simultaneously carry out the socialist reformations and national constructions. Also about political reconstructions, the aftermath of the Vietnam War in 1975 saw a nominal start of rebuilding the countries, especially in terms of the state apparatus and dealing with reactionary elements. To cope with the challenge posed by reactionary element, the Vietnamese government has developed the system of re-education scam. These scams were intended to re-establish individual facilitated, with this providing ideological guidance to ensure that their alignment with the socialist principle of the state. And also one point about building the socialist economy, that after reunion, party ideologies. We have the it was outlined in the second five-year plan of the government and announced at the Four National Party Congress, as I mentioned before, and also the socialist transformation, the plan, the first after reunification, straight out development of the agriculture and light industry, and also the common economy in which almost everything was decided by the state, met the afterwards. Another one, I also read the announcement that is the publish of the Vietnamese Communist Party about establish a common economy. Also in the Nguyen book, school on March 13, 1977, the General Secretary Lê Duong clearly stated that collective ownership is the third most important invention in human history, demonstrating a commitment to himself and the nation in shaping economic destiny. So about the external balancing through the Sino-Soviet alliance, and we know that after the Soviets, the Sino and Soviet splits take place from 1950 to 1970, so therefore after the Vietnam War, after 1975, the Vietnam have to face with the China invasions. So Vietnam has to choose take place on the other countries. So they were supported by the Soviet military and technical support, also economic support from the Soviet Union. So here's some brief of the conflict between the Soviet and China, that regional environment, the Cold War rivalry. The Sino-Soviet split started in the late 1950s and continued to the later 1970s. The China increasingly voiced the abroad role of the North Vietnamese collaboration with the Soviet Union, which enhanced the Chinese sphere of the lecture Soviet encirclement policy directed to China. So by engaging the Sino-American reapproachment in 1979, the China could see the U.S. to balance the Soviet threat. So both the China and U.S. believe that the Soviet Union has its personalist and for Southeast Asia. When the Vietnam chose into the arms of the Soviet Union, the China decided to cut aid to the Vietnam in 1978, but had not retained close ties with the Soviet Union. And a closer relationship with the Soviet Union provided economic and military aid, it was security assurance against an aggressive China. So the increase of the Soviet and Vietnamese relations led to the further decay in Sino-Vietnam relations. So here's also the U.S. report of the Soviet aid through the North Vietnam about the military and also the technology supporting through the war. And about the Soviet military, we can see that the USSR gained the most influence after supplying the North Vietnam with military equipment. And in 1978, the USSR started a military alliance with the Vietnam, and also the economic support from the Soviet Union. So we have the win-win collaborations, the broadly as the Vietnam also joined the Comecon in the COMECON in 1978. And by the 1982, we received the 200,000 tons of grains and 100% of oil and nearly 1,800 of total import from the Soviet Union. And so about straight of the oils. So here's also on 1978 in Moscow, the General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party signed the Vietnam-Soviet Union Treaty of the Friendship and Collaboration. The final point about the external balancing power is that when after the 1989, Vietnam announced its decisions to withdraw all of its troops from Cambodia, and by the end of September, and this step toward conciliation and with the change of the Soviet leadership. So we also face with the increased domestic and economic problem, because the government just released that lowering the Sino-Soviet conflict and disengaging China from the Western security system was a far more important objective than having good relations with the Vietnam and significant influence in Indochina. So for overall, in the internal balancing of power, we can see that the Vietnam have the struggle of unifications of the country by establish the national building and also the economic problem. And they also have to face the problem of external balancing power between the Sino and Soviet splits, and also face the problem with the United States about the soldiers. For of that, I have the conclusions that in short, the Vietnam post-war journey from the 1954 to the 1979 was marked by the dynamic interplay of international and external factors, shaping the national trajectory. The internal, it focused on rebuilding state structure and consolidating the political and economic control evident in the establishment with education schemes and the central bank economic model after the China's collective mastery ideology. And the external, Vietnam navigated the dedicated diplomatic patterns aligned with the China, the South's military support and technology from the Soviet Union to engaging with the U.S. through negotiations. So for all of the reasons why the Vietnam chose to release to the normalizations with the United States to the 1995. That's all my research paper, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Vaughn, and thank you also, Phuong, for two fine presentations. I realized that I neglected to give you the title of our third presentation. It is Memory, Reconciliation, and Change, the story of Bình An Cemetery. Bình An Cemetery, of course, was referenced by both Ron and Andrew in the lunchtime remarks. You're going to get a lot more information about that site. Our three presenters here are going to remain at the table to make their presentation. However, I want to mention that as part of the work they did here, they produced a really beautiful film about their research on the cemetery. They're going to show excerpts from it as part of their presentation here. So Ha and Bun and I will move over here for the balance of their presentation, and then we'll come back to the stage for questions and answers. So we'll turn it over to Tiana, Thao, and Mo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Louder.
Hello, hello. So today we'll be discussing, as Edward Miller said, memory, reconciliation, and change in the story of the Bình Cemetery. First, we want to introduce ourselves again. Hi, I'm Tiana. I'm a second-year student at Dartmouth, and I'm studying psychology with a minor in Asian studies. My family is from Vietnam, and I was born and raised here in the U.S. in Tampa, Florida.
Hi everyone, I'm Thao. I'm from the north of Vietnam. I'm currently a third-year student at Fulbright University, majoring in Vietnam Studies.
Hi, I'm Long. I'm junior, majoring in history and Vietnam study at Fulbright University, Vietnam. I was born and raised in Saigon, Vietnam.
And we worked on this project last December along with 3 other members who are not able to make it today, who are Minh, OA, and Matahuliska. And before diving in, yes, I would like to introduce a little bit about Bình Cemetery. So Bình Cemetery is known as the Bien Hoa Military Cemetery. It's the largest burial ground for soldiers of the Arvin. It is located in Bình Dương Province, Vietnam. It should be 1 hour and a half drive away from Ho Chi Minh City.
So we're going to divide the presentation into 4 sections. The first one being the history, where we'll discuss the establishment of the cemetery and then the changes in regulation of the cemetery from the fall of Saigon to contemporary Vietnam. And then second, we'll discuss the encounters that we had in the cemetery with our field work and how we covered our investigation. And then third, our findings, including the information we learned from the interviews we had with the local diaspora. And then we'll wrap it up with a conclusion and its impact on memory, reconciliation, and change.
So I want to cover a little bit on the history of the Bien Hoa Military Cemetery, or nowadays the Penang Cemetery. So the Bien Hoa Military Cemetery was established at the end of 1964 when the death toll increased for South Vietnamese soldiers, and the burial space in the military cemeteries around Saigon regularly became insufficient. And the cemetery was located near the Bien Hoa province, which is now today the Bình An ward of the Bình Dương province. And it was built on an area of 125 hectares from 1967 until the fall of Saigon in 1975, and it's including the burial space for approximately 30,000 graves, and the commemoration sites like the Nguyen, the Duong, and the Thương Tích statue. And the cemetery, as you can see on the slide, there's a map, and the map shows that it was divided into many burial zones for different groups of socialists and also the politicians that served the Republic of Vietnam. And by 1975, approximately 60,000 South Vietnamese soldiers had been buried here at the cemetery. However, after the fall of Saigon in 1975, the cemetery was closed to public and placed under the military control of the Communist force. And later, its name was changed from the Bien Hoa Military Cemetery into the Bình An Cemetery, and commemoration sites between the cemetery, like the Thương Tích statues or the Den Tu Si, has been abandoned or torn down. The graves in the cemetery became overgrown with and gravestones were destroyed or removed by authorities, which we will discuss in more detail in our findings. And with it being under the control of the new regime, access to the cemetery becomes strictly restricted as it's become a military zone. So as a military zone, the visitor attempting to pay respect to their relatives, like the relatives of the soldier who buried their face to challenge as the cemetery was inaccessible during that time. And as a result, they are not only unable to visit their loved one in the cemetery, but also they cannot maintain the gravestone of their relatives. In the 2000s, with the result of the Dartmouth policy and also like the normalization between Vietnam and the United States, there were significant reforms that made fostering progressive change in the nation's approach to the history and reconciliation. The diplomatic relations between both states, the United States and Vietnam, were focused on the Vietnamese diaspora and promoting the national reconciliation. So, notably, in 2005, Prime Minister Nguyen he signed a decision to transfer the Penang Cemetery from military to civil management. So, which is enabled the Penang Cemetery to be treated as a regular cemetery and allowing for grave visit, restoration, and also relocations. The public access was made easier despite being partially controlled by the government. And later in the 2010s, the Vietnam-US relationship was characterized by the incremental just building, economic cooperation, and also the reconciliation. So this is the background to create a broader context for discussion around the post-war legacies and led to more and more grave restoration happen in the cemetery. That following a project begun in the late 1997 to annually restore the graves and encourage the overseas Vietnamese to visit and repair their relatives' graves.
Now let's move on to the second part, which is encounters at Vietnam Cemetery. So with that being said, our research doesn't only show the effort to reconciliation between the two states, between the United States and Vietnam, but also with the ties to the Vietnamese diaspora community, with the ties to the cemetery. So we have made a total of 4 field trips to the cemetery. We have collected a lot of audio, visual research, filmed multiple surveys with caretakers and visitors to the cemetery, and we also collated footages of the site. Usually we attempted to visit the cemetery on busy times such as Sunday morning so that we can, talk and meet to as many people as possible. However, most of our requests were declined due to the fear of the government repercussion. However, we were privileged enough, privileged enough to meet Mr. Van Lang Lee, a 75-year-old former South Vietnamese soldier. And after a while of talking to him, we realized that he has been cleaning the cemetery every Sunday morning for 12 years now. So during the time that the cemetery has to face with the destruction and neglection from the government, people like him both act independently or in group. Come to the cemetery, clean and upkeep a lot as a way to, they actually step in to fill the void. Other than the normal acts of care, the ceremonial rituals have also become an integral part of maintaining the cemetery. Other than that, we also had the honor to meet Mr. Ted Osh's former United States ambassador to Vietnam, and Mr. Phuong, ambassador of Vietnam to Germany, to examine more about the government perspective on reconciliation problem. So during our interview with Mr. Ted Osh's, we got to know that the cemetery was made a priority in his time, and he also yeah. He also expressed that the oligarch making changes to their attitudes to the treatment of former enemies is a current Vietnamese government. And he also had told us about this, he has had a saying which is very memorable to us. He said that those who suffer the most, those who fought for the yellow flag and lost family, had the hardest time accepting the US and Vietnam reconciliation, but they were the most important people that he tried to reach. Other than that, our interview with Mr. Quang also allowed us to have another insight, another view within Vietnam. He said that some people came up to him and talked to him. They said that, why do you care for the remains of the enemy when we do not even have enough resources to proper care for soldiers? So we have collected very diverse insights here, but both of them agreed with each other. They met at the same point that they believe that moving forward and greater attention should be given to the cemetery instead of replacing emphasis on the lingering impact of the war. The preservation of the fallen urban soldiers also extended further beyond its physical presence as a cemetery. So if you come to California or Texas, you can find easily the Vietnam War Memorial in Westminster or another one in Houston, Texas. And the thing is, they both located near the commercial street. That symbolizes the Vietnamese diaspora community, integrity of it inside the American civic spaces.
Thank you. Now for the information we gathered. So as mentioned before, after the fall of Saigon, honoring armed soldiers became politically sensitive, where flags and images were strictly prohibited and tombstones were stripped of any references to them. Family and friends were also denied from accessing the cemetery, so they were prevented from physically commemorating and honoring their loved ones. So basically, the armed soldiers buried there, who were once commemorated as heroes, were reduced to mere historical footnotes, treated as ordinary civilians rather than veterans. However, after 2007, after 2007, when the vice chairman of the Bình People's Committee reopened access to the cemetery, members of the local Vietnamese diaspora stepped in and took on the responsibility of maintaining and restoring the cemetery. However, as we mentioned before, there are over 16,000 graves, so obviously the locals have not been able to fully recover nearly half of it. And we noticed, this was evident during our visits to the cemetery. So as you can see, many graves were covered with overgrown weeds, like on the right, and trees were also purposely planted around the tombs. And when we went to visit the cemetery, we saw that the roots had grown through the tombstones, or even trees had fallen on top of the graves. And there were also stolen tombstones. The ones that were present, many of them had their faces and names purposely erased or destroyed. So even though access has improved, the condition of the cemetery still remained neglected. However, when we interviewed with Van Lung Lei, he brought hope to the state of the cemetery. So he's been cleaning the cemetery every Sunday for the past 12 years, and he's especially active on holidays like that, Lunar New Year's. And I'll go ahead and show his segment of our film that we made, as I alone cannot fully represent all the work that he's done. Can you play the video, please?
fact that everything is cheap and spending on buildings, right?
And the architecture is
Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties that we was playing.
yeah. Yeah, it's impressive.
Let me think. At least, yeah, at least 30, 40. Yes, you could, if you want to. Yeah.
Just look up on that.
Since the highway is north of here, I would walk down to Broadway and then through the heart of campus.
Just straight up Broadway.
Yeah, and then through the heart of campus, and then you sort of veer
Oh,
off
you
to
just-
the right.
Gotcha.
And can you turn up my Duong too? That as well. Can you also make it full screen? Um, so, obviously. Okay, so it looks like the video isn't working, so we'll just move on to our conclusion. Basically, it was a really meaningful interview with Lee, who's been cleaning the cemetery for 12 years. He's restored over 1,000 gravestones, and he brings his family along too. He's brought his daughter since she was 3 years old, and at the end, he has, it's actually, that's his family cleaning up the cemetery right now. So he has a Facebook page, which we'll show at the end, that has his own documentaries and short film. He makes his own documentaries about cleaning the cemetery and its current progress. So definitely check it out. Okay, so the conclusion. Can you go back to the slideshow? So the shifts in been on status from These shifts in Vietnam status from restricted military control to limited civilian access are symbolic of state-led memory narratives shaped by political pragmatism and foreign policy considerations rather than genuine reconciliation. However, the cemetery's nature of activity from the local diaspora reveals the limits of state control over memory. So acts of commemoration led by volunteers create spaces for honoring the fallen soldiers of our men.
And reconciliation is not simply just about opening gates or restoring graves. It's also about handling with the complexities of history so that we can ensure that the spaces of memory, however neglected, continue to provoke reflection for the past, present, and hopes for the future.
Okay, and we wanted to extend our deepest gratitude to Everett Miller, who advised our research project, and also Texas Tech for inviting us to present our work. And this is Run Lung Lay's Facebook page if you'd like to check it out. And then this is the QR code to the full version of our short film if you want to listen to it with audio.
Great. Thank you, Tiana, and Thao. Please do check out the full version of the video. It's only about 12 minutes long, but as I said, it's really, really spectacular. It's really too bad that we couldn't get the video playing properly. Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left here, so I'm going to open up the floor for questions. So please indicate to whom you are directing your question, and please have a question. That's what Q&A is all about. Start with Steve. We've got the microphone coming here.
This is perhaps a personal question.
It's not on.
Is this working? Can I try to use a loud voice? Let's take a time. I have a general question listening to the presentations, all of which were excellent, including the English. But I'm wondering if any of you, this goes to any of you, would you be willing to share with us on a personal level where you think you would be today if you were not at Fulbright University? What is better for you for going to Fulbright University? What might be a consequence if you had gone to another university in Saigon or Hanoi or wherever, or United States? Is there something you can tell us to help us understand what Fulbright University has done for you? Thank you.
Thoughts about that?
Hi, thank you for your question. I think it's a great opportunity to advertise for my school. Okay, so back in the day when I was in high school, I had a plan to go to a business school. You know, in Vietnam, there's some school like Foreign Trade University that is very popular. And I chose that because a lot of people did that. Yeah. And I guess as a 18 years old girl, I didn't know much about the outside world. And yeah, so I just wanted to do what other people do. So I think Fulbright has changed me a lot. I never imagined myself studying history. So I'm a history major at Fulbright. Because as you may know, the history in Vietnam textbook is very different from history research. So back then in high school, history is just about remembering all the facts, all the military battles, how many people died, stuff like that. But when I study history at Fulbright, I get to know diverse perspective. For example, about the Vietnam War, I know the perspective, the NLF, the North Vietnam government, the South Vietnam government, and the American people. So it's really great. And I think it also, trained my critical thinking, not just in history, but in other subjects. And I think why I study history, I think it gives me a little bit cheesy now, but it gives me a meaning of life. Yeah, I understand, why people here, why I'm here today, and I think it's a great tool, to understand, to connect people and sympathize with them.
Great, thank you. Carol?
There's still an answer. She wants to say something else.
Go ahead.
Can I also share
Please, go ahead.
sharing
Yeah.
when I'm a student at Fulbright for your questions. So thank you for your questions. I also write my sharing on the notebook. So when in high school, when I accidentally watched the Vietnam War 17 episode on YouTube, I have many trauma and also have many questions about what's actual Vietnamese history. So what is the shoes? Because it's very different from the traditional Vietnamese history that I studied in high school. So what is about Vietnamese histories? And then I joined many workshops in order reach out to many professors to answer this, to have the real answer. But almost the answer is always about the traditional Vietnamese histories. But it's not different. It's very different between the Vietnam War episode that I watched. So I decided to apply to the Fulbright University, and I also write an essay about how I'm feeling when watching the episode. And I think that my mission in Fulbright is very easy. Like I want to understand the Vietnamese history from the both side, the north side, the south, and the other ethnic minority groups, and to answer the questions: who am I? And also the history of my ancestor. you know, my last name is N. I have the Chinese ancestor, but I cannot speak Chinese language. Also, my grandma or my grandfather cannot speak Chinese. I got many questions about my ancestor. So I think that the reason why I came to Fulbright to answer questions, who am I, what is the history of my ancestor? Yeah, not sure.
Tao or Mom, do you have any thoughts you want to share?
Thank you so much for your question. So my experience is actually pretty similar to other students. I'm just gonna answer it very briefly. So originally I'm from North, right? I was born and raised there for 18 years. Then I moved to South to study. And to be honest, before my experience at Fulbright University, Vietnam, I didn't know so much about the kind of history that I know today. And but what I know is if I ever ended up in another university, my attitude and my insight would not change so much. So much more. For example, so I was in Lubbock, even though it's not about Vietnam War, but because it's bordering with China, so we have had a lot of wars, like several wars with Chinese people. But the thing is, what I was taught is that my teachers, because in some school field trips, will visit a kind of a site that many Chinese soldiers and many Vietnamese soldiers fell down, and we were taught to pay tribute to all of them, not only to Vietnamese soldiers' side. So yeah, that's why I think that if I ever ended up in another university, I'll just be the same. Thank you.
So actually, like my story is quite similar to Jiwon here.
Louder.
Okay. So when I was in high school and in Vietnam, they got like a competition for students to like in the city level for each subject in the school. And so I'm doing history, but then when I'm doing it, I feel like it's just being trapped into the narrative. And actually so even like some of the topics like the French revolutions or some other topics that not like state sanctioned in Vietnam, but I still feel like, so why people just use only this perspective to see the issue but not the other one. And when I'm coming to Fulbright, I think like I find something new. Initially, I only get to Fulbright because like I want to experience like a new education style, different from the normal traditional education style in the university in Vietnam. But because I cannot afford to go study abroad too. But later when I come to Fulbright, I think like it's much more than just a university, but it's offering me like a place not only to like they don't teach you how to the Western style university, but actually we were forced to figure out the things by ourselves, and yeah, that's what made me to find out more about a lot of questions that I used to feel being trapped, but then later I feel like, oh, I need to find an answer for it by myself, not just like being taught about something and listen to it. And that's why like I think like Fulbright is really rewarding to me so far until now, and I really appreciate that to myself that I chose Fulbright but not our university.
Professor Hart has a question.
I do, but I'm going to defy you and insist on making a comment first. And I just want to say, as I'm Justin Hart, I'm on the program committee here at Texas Tech, and I just want to thank all of you for being here. This was an inspirational panel. I actually write a little bit in my book about Senator Fulbright and what he envisioned with the Fulbright program back in 1946, and what you represent being here 75, 80 years later. I don't think he could have imagined that in his fondest dreams, and so you are great representatives. He was a great but flawed man, and you are the best of what he envisioned back in 1946. So thank you so much for being here. My question goes to the final presentation. Mr. Is it Lee or Lei? Lee? Do you have a sense, you mentioned that most people wouldn't talk to you. He not only is willing to talk to you, but puts himself out there on Facebook, goes to the cemetery every day, every weekend for 12 years. What is it about him that makes him willing? I assume that there are some risks for him to do what he does. And so getting to know him a little bit, what is it about him that makes him willing to put himself out there in a way that most others are not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the other caretakers that we interviewed, they were fearful of government repercussions, but when I interviewed Lee, which I wasn't able to show in the video, he actually thought the government has done a sufficient job of taking care of the cemetery. He just said that this era, this time, is not really a time where the youth will focus on taking care of the cemetery. It's just not I guess the trends and political activity. So I think he knows that he's coming from a place of good intentions. He's not fearful that the government is coming for him because he says that the government is doing enough, and and also he's a former armed soldier, so that also I think he just feels the right to just speak.
We have a question right here.
Yeah, hi, I have a question from Nguyen. Your research is so complex. It's not just the American side or the Vietnamese side, but you including the Russian side and the China side. So in your Fulbright University, do you have access to all those information to do the research, or you just do the research based on the Vietnamese information? Like, did you get access from the Russia information or the China's information to do your research for your understanding Vietnam prolonged approach to the normalizing relation with the United States, right?
First of all, thank you for your questions. So this is the research paper and also the final research paper that I wrote in the course of researching Vietnamese diplomatic strategy within China or the United States at the professor Duong, and he's also supervisor for me for the research paper. So most of the information that I put in slide is based on the other research from the other authors, and also secondary data that I researched about China and Russia. And as you said, that's very correct that my research paper is very complex because it includes many information about Russia, also in China or United States. But my main, the reason why I apply the balancing power concept in the IR, because in the IR, as I study that, I put a state or a country, like the actor, and then I will compare to the other countries. So that is the reason why I want to put the Vietnamese Communist Party government as the actor to compare to the other countries. So in China, United States, and also the Soviet Union. Yeah, that's my answer. Thank you so much.
Another question.
Hey, my name is Kelly. I'm from California. First, I'd like to applaud all of you for the courage and the the long travel to be here. You've done a great job, your presentation. I just have a few comments and then a question. First of all, I did visit Lào Cai. I went there, so I saw for myself. I also visited the Nghĩa Trang Đồi Biên Hòa, and I saw for myself and the inaccessible attempt by the, I don't know who ran it, but they purposely make it in such a way that it's almost like, don't come here. And my visit was recent. It was less than 2 years ago. So I traveled the entire country. Just want to know what happened to my country. I was born there. So I lived through the hard time when the communists took over, when everything was rationed. You have to have somebody's signature for everything that you purchase, meat, oil, gasoline, whatever, okay? So they breathe down each and everybody's neck. But for them to have you coming here to the free world, so that's a big change, okay? So second of all, these are the questions that or the comment that I want to raise. Minh, your presentation, you talk about re-education. Was it really a re-education camp, or was that a concentration camp for retaliation and punishment? So that's something that you should think about. Secondly, do you, as the panel, would consider writing history again as it should be written and not mandated by any political affiliation? You know, we are free thinkers. We express ourselves freely. And when we see something that is unjust, we stand up and we speak up. That is the role of scholars, of people who go to school and have an education that not many people are privileged to have. So that is something that I would like you to think about and hopefully to inspire other younger folks, your colleagues, your fellow students, and hopefully that together we can make a change. We talk about reconciliation, but it has to come from within. And us reaching out from both sides. And not just listen to what is presented in the media, even in the free world, okay? In a totalitarian system, we do what the government tells us to do, but we are born to think freely, and don't let anybody take that away from you.
I think that's a very good note to end on. We're out of time now. Do anybody in the Vietnam group want the last word here in response to those comments from Kelly?
You say something. How?
Any final words?
So because the meeting is here, so I thought that I would appreciate. So thank you so much for your sharing also the comments. I thought that the reason why I be here also to have a chance to listen for many perspectives of the both side or the other side. So thank you so much for the disaster university, also the staff to give us a chance to be here to listen for the other perspective that we can open our mind and our hearts to understand, to listen, and yeah, thank you so much.
Wonderful note, and please join me in thanking our entire panel.